So if you'd like to, we can start going around the table. We'll start with Sarah Beth and just introduce ourselves.
Hi, my name is Sarah Ward.
Jim Byers?
Lauren Wilcox.
Dan Campbell.
Lynn Madison.
April Dunham.
Margay Diamond. Gail Harper.
Marsh, Hudson Knapp.
Stu Hurd?
Okay, so we got the introductions done. We're going to recap last meeting from 11:04. Just some quick notes. We did have the outreach subcommittee report back about their thoughts, interview questions. They did send the interview questions out to us, so we can reach out to members, identified groups in the community. We also heard from the purpose subcommittee. They had a pretty quick one. We also identified 3 to 5 top goals to focus on. They decided to take on composition as well too. Thank you so much to everybody in that. So they're meeting to talk about composition of recommendations for that. And then we also formed a, not purpose, thank you, scope subcommittee as well too, which was Jim, Lynn, and myself. And anybody have any changes they would like to make the last meeting's minutes? Everything's good, so we accept the minutes from the last time?
I move we accept the minutes.
Any seconds? Okay, and then actually we have to,
We got it. Good.
That one's
you on this side. Okay, you got
We
it.
just want to make sure that when he calls in, you guys can hear. So
Perfect, okay.
I think we're good.
Another thing I meant to start with the agenda. We just want to make a couple quick changes. At number 3, the word was irrigate. Interviews, and that's supposed to be aggregate, thank you. And then the other part, under 3, was supposed to be class written reports to Margay. It says for condensation, but should be for compilation. So we're going to adjust that. And then number 6, we're going to postpone the scope. Yeah, we'd like to make a motion to postpone scope of practice, and not scope of practice, right? We did.
Yeah, that is right. Yes, number 6.
Okay.
And replace with a discussion about the complaint process. So since we have the complaint report that came in to everyone a few days ago, we thought we would make some room since the scope of practice folks feel like they're not quite ready yet, and we didn't have a chance to, well, it's not that they're not ready, we didn't have a chance to look at their stuff ahead of time. So we thought that would be a good thing. We'll just push that to next time and replace it with a discussion.
And I just want to verify, was it Marcia's group that we're postponing, or mine, Jim?
I
and
thought
Lynn's
we were
group?
postponing the purpose.
Oh,
We didn't, the reason why I had suggested postponing the purpose is because we didn't finish up what we did until last night. And so I didn't get it in the email until this
Got it.
morning, and I know some of us really want to have time to look at things before we comment on them.
got it. Okay, so we're keeping the scope of practice.
Got it.
Just postponing purpose.
All right. And replacing that with complaint process, or complaint report, let's just say, complaint report that was issued out, and maybe some general reactions to that, and then some discussion of sort of what to do with that information, I think would be appropriate. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Where was the complaint report? That
Well,
was
it came
issued?
to everybody via email. Stu sent
I've got a
that.
copy here, I'd be happy to share
Oh.
with you.
I don't remember what day that came out.
We came to you with the agenda.
It looked like,
It was like issue your last
Oh, okay.
meeting
Yep,
before.
yep, that's what I
yeah, that one.
Everybody good with that change on the agenda?
Can we have a motion to accept the changes to the agenda?
I'll move to make the changes to the agenda. Second.
I think we're supposed to vote. You make a motion, and then after it's made, you vote. So all those in favor would say,
Okay, we're going to do a vote. All in favor of changing the agenda, accepting the changes? Aye. Any opposed?
thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for keeping us in track. Okay, so the first thing we have is the outreach subcommittee report. So I'm going to turn it over to that subcommittee.
I was on that subcommittee. So I just want to say that we had some good discussion, and think that one of the things we were hoping for today is that we could just spend some time of our allotted 45 minutes, because I think this is a big, juicy, meaty topic, to go around and report out, as we discussed last meeting, in aggregate, right? So here's what you heard to each of the answer to those questions. We're not looking for anyone's names. We're not looking for even any associated organization. I think that just, this is what I've heard. Would be great if you can sum up your conversations so that we have a sense from you of what your experience was. And if we can go around and do that, and then whatever you have typed up or written, handwritten, typed, whatever, if you would like to pass it forward to me, the intention of the subcommittee was that we would produce a report back at the next meeting that is, again, a summary. So as each of you are individually giving out a summary report today, that would be a collection, right, of all of your summaries together so that we have a sense of where, you know, out of X number of interviews and discussions that we've had, here's how many times this topic came up. Here's where we see, you know, pain points here. Here's where there were great successes. So we want to just be able to pull that together, and it doesn't go on a shelf, right? So, there's two things. One is, not everybody got a chance to connect with their people in time to come to this meeting and have everything jotted down. And so we wanted simply to recognize when we pushed out that message a few days ago, which is there might be some stragglers, and we certainly want to hear from those people. However, there does got to be a cutoff, right, for putting something into an aggregate format and saying we're going to use this as some kind of thermometer and guide and check for ourselves moving forward. Like, are we really making some difference in what we heard? We're supporting the positive things that we heard and what we do moving forward. So I see it as ultimately ends up being a guiding document. No intentions of putting anyone's name or anyone's personal system, nothing. Just aggregate information so that we can put that back out. And I think also if we were able to, as a subcommittee, part of our work would be kind of holding our feedback collectively up against what's in that 2019 report that I asked Stu to re-push that link out to everyone a couple days ago, because that was a while ago, and that document still has a lot of good information in it from a lot of people's time and energy that went into creating that and coming up with all of that information. So I think doing...
Margaret, just to be clear, that 2019 report, you're talking about the chiefs of police?
I am, I'm
Okay,
sorry.
that's all right.
The independent audit of the police.
CIACP.
Thank you. So I think, you know, we have some other things that we can hold up. We can hold up, you know, looking at the ordinance and what were things that came forward from all the people who were involved in those discussions, and just kind of lay out where we think we ought to be rooting our work in. I think that's why we did this, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Because I know there were some concerns about people's privacy and what that process would look like. If we were to pick a cutoff to say, it's not that we'll never hear people, but in terms of putting it into something like formalized to report out on, would it be okay with everyone if we suggested the Monday before next meeting? I don't know what that date is. Because that way, if you still were putting something into me or to anyone on the outreach committee, we could put it into that. We could slip it into that final report. The 29th is correct Monday. 29th. And that way, we can be pushing out a report to everyone to look at in advance of Thursday's meeting and be sure to have everyone's feedback up into that point. And that gives people a chance to just clean up any loose ends of communication.
Sounds good to me.
I think really what they were training, one of the things I heard from multiple members of this board was we really want community input and we want that transparency, so I think that will help as well, giving us a little bit extension of that deadline, so that way we can have some opportunity for that community input.
Margaret, could I ask you to pass back down on composite? I will need that to be
Say it again, the what?
the composite for.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I got ahead of myself.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll pass it down. We'll pass it along.
That would be great.
All right. So my assignment was to talk to some elders in the community. And I approached or invited about 21 elders or persons who worked with people, advocates of elders, which included the Senior Citizen Group and the Southwestern Vermont Council on Aging. Several mentioned that they did not want to participate but had, quote, no issues with the police. Several agreed to participate but did not follow through. And 5 actually participated with me and 1 participated with Sarah Beth. So I'll report out on the 5 that I completed. Under the heading of connecting, which had to do with experiences with the Bennington Police Department, 3 of the 5 all had positive experience. 2 mentioned extreme support in very traumatic situations and how much they appreciated that. 1 reported a lack of follow-through after she expressed a concern, and 1 reported that they felt like they were not heard. The complaint and compliment section, 3 said that they had made compliments, but they were not done formally, so they didn't really expect any feedback. And 2 were neither having reported a complaint or lodged a compliment. 1 knew how to make a complaint, definitely, by going to the website in a formal way. And the other 4 were not sure. They guessed that they would probably call, a couple of them guessed they would probably call the police department. When asked if they needed help making a complaint, there was 1 yes, 3 no, and 1 maybe, depending on the nature of the complaint. Did you feel safe or would you feel safe in making a complaint? There were 3 yeses and 2 maybes. And E was why, and the 1 who guessed maybe thought that there could be retribution, mentioned what a small town we lived in and how everybody knew everybody's family members. Under safety, there were 3 who responded they always felt safe in town. 1 said not safe when one time the police did not respond to them. And 1 was that they had no experience one way or the other. Under fairness, 1, yes, they felt it was, that the police department were fair, they were treated fairly. 1 said not always treated fairly, and 3 said they really didn't have any experience to draw on to answer that question. 4 were reasons why you didn't feel safe, and 1 person said it was related to racial bias, that they were frequently pulled over when a black ex-spouse was in the car for no apparent reason other than a history with drugs. And that same person said that they felt safe when the police responded to calls. Under fairness and the question about do you think police understand all sectors, 4 don't know. Their comments were who could. Another comment was they would probably try. Another comment was people need to take individual responsibility for themselves regardless of sector. I'm not saying I know what everything means in this, I'm just telling you what I was told. No one can understand all sectors, and 1, no, they need to get someone on board to help with mental health and drug calls. Other comments, the police on request have visited the senior center to talk about their work and answer questions. It would be nice to bring new officers to town offices and other organizations for introductions. Police need more training, communicating with persons on drugs, having mental health issues, or people with dementia. They appreciate the formation of a community police board and hope it helps with communication. We need more work on building community partnerships. It would be helpful if the police had more information about community resources, even the small ones to whom they could refer individuals for help. And we live in a wonderful community. So that's what I got.
Mark?
Well, I did something a little different, and I interviewed 12 people. They were from the Sunday Night Supper, from the homeless shelter, and a couple of people that I knew and had experiences and checked in with. So as a total of 12, I got 2 more. And I took highlights rather than, I like what you did, the hours. I never thought to do it your way, but that's because we're different people. So here's what I got. Many people I interviewed had positive interactions with police, and some officers clearly listen well to the people they encounter and embody understanding. Several interviewees commended police, so these are sort of themes. Some people struggling with disabilities and struggling financially or living in crowded housing situations report experiences of disrespect, threats, like an officer to a woman, "If you close that door, I will come in and get you and drag you down the stairs," swearing, confrontational behavior, and escalating violence by a police officer. One interviewee reported that bystanders have been drawn into conflict by police and arrested, while the reason for the call to police was ignored. Officers have many interactions in some neighborhoods and face very challenging situations with many people involved in complex situations. It's difficult for me to tell if some officers need support and training to deal better with these challenges or more serious consequences. Some officers and leaders are reported to have prejudgments about persons and behaviors because of where they live. Sometimes this seems to lead to extra care for vulnerable people, and sometimes the failure to understand and even-handed expectations and treatments of residents. Some people living in desperate circumstances have been treated with great respect and kindness by officers who get to know them and care about their well-being. It was reported that a police leader advocated arresting a person simply because of their race. It is reported that at least one officer has viciously mocked a resident because of their race. We must come firmly to grips, this is my opinion, with racial injustice in our police behavior. Speaking of safety, several people reported feeling much safer with the presence of the Bennington Police Department at their place of worship and in school. One interviewee expressed interest in joining the police force because of the interactions they had with our police. I'm hoping they'll give me their name and let me forward it. The wide range of experience I've heard tell me that some very positive things are happening in our police department. We need to encourage that behavior and support officers who are serving long hours and working hard. At the same time, officers need effective training and supervision and accountability to function in just and positive ways and stop the very unacceptable behaviors. Poverty, physical and mental illnesses, race, religion, and numerous other factors leave members of our community in very vulnerable situations. As one interviewee urged, collaborative partnerships, like we talked about, Gail, with people who have skills that are not in police training are very important. And officers need training in the roles they can and need to play. The community policing models we're pursuing, I think, are very important in that way. Another segment of comments were the complaint system does not work for several of the interviewees. Numerous people fear retribution. Some suggest that complaints and compliments be separated from the police department so people can feel safe expressing their concerns. Even one interviewee who felt very safe to thank our police felt afraid to register a complaint with police lest it be tracked back to them. Developing a system where people can be safe to express their concerns, knowing they will be systematically investigated and acted upon, and they will get feedback on their responses, I think this is very important. People who have had negative experiences with our police that I interviewed are longing to receive an apology, and the lack of that makes it difficult for them to forgive disappointments, make a fresh start, and develop trust. The wide ranges of experiences that I've heard tell me that some very positive things are happening in our police department, and we need to encourage their behavior and support officers who are serving long and working hard. At the same time, officers need effective training and supervision and accountability. All of these interviews tell me that the systems we're developing are crucially important for many people in our community and to the well-being of the entire community. And we need to hold these messages of our interviews before us as we develop each part of our system to try to address each one shared with us and build on the positive affirmations we give.
Thanks, Taisha.
You can tell I'm used to writing films. Sorry.
That was great.
You can tell I deal in data.
Mark, did you want to share with us?
interesting enough, the 6 people I spoke to, one of the common threads that kept popping up was they don't believe the police department issue, they believe the town governance is the issue. Some of them stated they point blank feel the police have their hands tied or spending more time looking over their shoulders for governance to come down on them than police misbehaving. They also point out one of their concerns is the drug issue in this town. And again, they point out they felt the state's attorneys and other entities were not giving the police the support they need to deal with these issues. And a couple of guys said their issues were outsiders, transients coming to town creating problems, mostly around drug related. But they feel a significant amount of issues in this town can be traced back to drugs and the police not having adequate resources or support to deal with criminality in this town. One gentleman specifically stated to me he felt the people in town don't know the police officers. And, you know, he's a lifelong resident in his 70s. And he pointed out there was a time where he pretty much knew all the police officers in town. And now they don't have that sense of community with the police. Of course, with 19 officers, 15,000 people, I find it very hard to anticipate, you know, some guy walking a beat and get to know everybody. Logistically, I don't see it can happen unless it can be double or triple with PD. Somehow, I don't think it's going to happen. But as I said, that's the common thing I have. I kept hearing that people have very little faith in town management, and they feel the police are not respected or supported well by town government. And it struck me as odd when gentleman mentioned that how he and some of his peer groups, they don't vote because they feel that there's, for lack of, well, I would say like a machine, political machine in this town. And that speaking up is not a complaint issue. Speaking up, their main angst is retribution. And they didn't say retribution from the police. They said the retribution from the political leadership of the town of what they feared.
Thank you, Clyde. I just had a quick question as you're saying that. I'm wondering, and I don't know if you ever, got into that. Did they think the oversight committee would help with that issue?
Well, a couple of them said they're glad to hear that somebody is stepping up and looking at all that's going on here. And then they expressed skepticism with entrenched leadership of the town. We had this committee, but their concern was what's going to be done about the people they feel are not effective or responsive to the needs of the community, but more responsive to their own agendas.
Well, thank you, because I can say some little thought, I love hearing feedback from the community, because it kind of makes my brain, the gears start turning and taking different perspectives, so that helps out.
Well, I was surprised that, it drifted in that direction. And then there were people sitting there saying, oh yeah, and then they started opening up about their concerns. And retribution seems to be a big part of it, and not to the extent that they feel the police are not supported. The police aren't supported, whether it be by the elected governors or even the rank and file, the people in this town are giving it greater resources, i.e., the state's attorney really coming down on the criminals. And as one guy pointed out, most of these drug problems are not generated in Bennington, they're outside of the community and perpetuated, which could or could not be the case, but that's perception.
Thank you. That was very helpful, though. Just, a whole different spin that I was not even thinking of, but makes me kind of like said, gets my gears running, so.
So I went to 2 different groups. One of them, like Gail said, with the seniors, and then I went to another group. And Both groups were fantastic, willing to talk. There was some people that did say that they didn't want to talk because I wouldn't like their answers. And I said, well, this is what we're looking for. I'm not going to judge. I told him it was confidential. We just want to talk to you because we want to have, if you have a different opinion of what is happening in town, I want to hear it. And this one individual she was like, no, she just did not want to do it. So I tried to coax her, but I respected her privacy. Most of the people that I did talk to had a very positive impression of the police. They do want to see more collaboration between the police and the other agencies in town. The agencies that are trying to assist people, whether it be UCS or PAVE or DCF, they just want to see like more collaboration so that they can, try to work together to help people. They also said that police, when they, stop anybody or when they confront anybody, the police need to be respectful. You have to be respectful of the citizens of Bennington. But they also said it's a two-way street. When, the citizens get stopped, they need to be respectful to the police too. It's one side, if one side is going to do it, the other side has to do it too. So that was really important to a lot of people. Sometimes they feel like the police, they have to take, a lot of abuse and stuff like that, and they feel like, a lot of people felt like like I said, it's a two-way street. They want to see the police out in the community. They feel like they are out there. They feel like they're very visible. And most of the people do say when they see the police out on the street or whatever, it makes them feel safer. Because of COVID, maybe they haven't been able to do as much as they have in the past, but just the programs that they do have, go like the popsicle program or the programs with the, with the children at Willow Park and stuff like that, like the nights out and stuff like that, the trunk or treat. They really appreciate when they see the police doing stuff like that. They would like to see increased staffing. A lot of them knew that the police department is down right now, and I know that's something that's being worked on. They're trying to recruit more, but with the hours that the police have to work, whether they have to do overtime or double shifts, they think that takes a toll on them. So it hurts them, but not only does it hurt them, it also hurts the community because they're not there maybe sometimes when they're needed. They also would like to see people educated about what the police do. Like, we see them during traffic stops and stuff like that, but they want people to be educated about the police when they go to work on a daily basis, what they're up against. And then increased training for the police. Like, the more training, the better.
Thank you.
Okay, I was only able to get to one of my groups, and that was Group Connect. And so, first off, that one of the things that needed to be stated, it's not a monolithic community, and the views that represented, there's a whole spectrum. But for the most part, here's the aggregate of what came down. With connecting, you had any experience with Bennington Police Department? Yes. And was it positive, negative, or both? And it came down as both. One of the things that came down was like with the Pride Park Parade caravans and Pride parades. There's been a huge police interaction with that, and also then with media events, out and about town events. And so most people were happy with that, but a couple of people were upset about the police being part of that. They were hoping that it would just be like a community, the LGBTQA plus community, be part of that. Understanding, of course, that you need the security and everything like that, but it was kind of like, so it was kind of a mixed bag. Some people felt uncomfortable with police presence being there. And what was the thing that they thought that would make the police department better? It would be more training about the LGBTQ plus issues. And I think that's a valid point. I think it's about for any community. It's an ongoing thing. The complaint compliment process. Have you ever made a complaint or a compliment about the police? Yes, that's a compliment. And that was with the
That's that's compliment music.
See, there you go. That's the Happy Police Department compliment.
There you go.
Okay. And when asked, would you know how to make a complaint, they said no, they would probably just email. So, and that tells me that they feel that the police department is accessible to them, even if they don't know the official channel to go through. If asked if there would be anything that would make you hold back about making a complaint or a compliment, some of the community members felt that they would hold back, but again, it's just because everybody has different experiences, and again, it's not a monolithic community. Safety. Has anybody in the BPD ever caused you to feel safe or unsafe? And the answer was yes, and it goes back with the interactions with Pride and the reactions that we've been. They felt safe, even though some people felt maybe unsure or uncomfortable. They did feel safe. Let's see. And under fairness, the response aggregate was that they have felt that everybody's been treated fairly when they have had interactions with the police, and that they felt safe with them. And that was what came back, is they felt safe. That's important, especially for a marginalized community that maybe didn't always feel that way. And I think actually that's huge. Do you believe that BDP understands the challenges and needs of all sectors of our community? No. The community is changing all the time, and especially as the new generations coming up, being much more open. They would like to see more training in trauma for traumatized communities. And I think part of that goes back to social media. We've got people now, especially in our younger population, who are being targeted on social media, and other people may not even be aware of it, except for like the peer group that the person's in. And so they feel that maybe just a little bit more I will not put my own words into that, I apologize. They feel that there should be more training on traumatized communities. We didn't really go into what that looked like, we didn't have time. Is there anything else you'd like the Safety and Equity Task Force to know? There was a phone call from an outside agency in Northampton concerning training for reaching out for more diversity training. So that didn't necessarily come from our community. But quite frankly, I included that also because I think it's more diversity training. An ongoing program of diversity training is always, I think, helpful. And that was it. That was a composite of people who break down.
Thank you so much, Jim.
So I was able to interview 5 people, the majority of which were folks in the community who reached out because my number and email was posted up there along with Lynn's. It was really a mixed bag. I mean, the majority of folks, about 4 out of 5 of them, had both negative and positive experiences. Among the negative, that some BPD officers respond with significant aggressiveness that wasn't relevant to the situation they were responding to. But they have also seen excellent discipline and behavior and wonderful de-escalation skills from BPD officers. As far as the complaint process, 4 out of the 5 said they would not feel comfortable, that they would fear retaliation if they were to make a complaint. 2 people actually have made complaints in the past, and they had said that they didn't receive any follow-up from those complaints that they made, so they're not sure what exactly happened with them. As far as moving forward, most people said that they want more training around mental health issues, more training in general, try to strive for a more diverse police force, perhaps more women on the police force was a recommendation. And I will say that Gracie received rave reviews.
Thank you, Lauren.
I'm still working on setting up hopefully 2 appointments. They're not filled in as well for me, so I haven't done that yet. Hopefully we get 2 done before we leave.
Okay, sounds good. I know it was a tight timeline, so.
Yeah, I actually had a similar kind of thing. I'm still playing phone tag with a couple of people. Like Lauren said, I got handful of in over email, just kind of general. And with those folks, because I couldn't initiate the conversation, it was a little harder to kind of follow the questions. Everybody who wrote to me via that kind of public email had negative comments to say, and really basically wanted to rehash with me what their experience had been. And so I needed to follow up and say, okay, given your experience, and then point to some of these questions about what could have been done better, what could have been improved, and then I also interviewed some of the folks I work with through BCIL who are, by definition, people with disabilities. And one of the things that really struck me in both the emails and the people I was interviewing was that there was really a lot of emotion behind the experiences they were describing, and they really needed to be heard about that first before I could even get them to start talking about brainstorming solutions or how to move forward from it. And I think that might be an important lesson for us to take away, is that first step of hearing people before then saying, okay, let's get into collaboration and brainstorming. What I heard overwhelmingly, and again, these are all folks who were pretty much only contacting me because they wanted to talk about negative experiences, was that there seems to be a sense that the police force can do whatever it wants, and that they're not beholden to anyone, or that the rules kind of don't apply to them. And mostly those were in descriptions of intimidating or more condescending behavior, which was also taken as being rude and also intimidating as well. It was what everybody described to me. There was a few folks who spoke about not being heard in terms of just not having, the police just didn't respond to their call. No one ever showed up apparently from their perception. And a few folks did acknowledge that there are staffing issues, but were questioning if, how the police pick and choose what calls they're going to respond to and what order. I also heard from a couple people that they feel like the police build a picture of someone as a troublemaker, and then once they have that idea in their head, they always approach that person as if they're a troublemaker, and don't really allow that person any wiggle room to be anything but a troublemaker, and then it ends up being repeated interactions that are build negativity upon negativity. One person, and this is kind of an aside, but it brings up a lot of questions, and this is kind of where you've been. They were telling me about the police attending their suicide attempt. And they told me the whole story of it, and I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, how is an officer prepared to attend a suicide attempt? To approach a person who's, actively in suicidal crisis. And that was the first question, the training to, how to approach somebody. And then the other thing is I wondered what kind of support officers get after coming out of a hairy situation like that. Do you guys get any support to process that?
No.
No.
There's the middle one way through, and I couldn't even tell you what it is, something I received through the town, as far as a brochure for some type of organization you can reach out to, that will be free of charge.
Like an employee assistance
Something
program.
like that. Actually, you know what, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
But there's nothing overtly, or if you were to say, would a supervisor say, oh, well, you just know what your experience, hey, would you like to do that? So that does not happen. It's more, like I said, nothing is overtly, but I mean, it's something you have to go seek out if you want to.
Right.
Like I said, it's not really the preference.
And I'm sorry, that was a little aside, but it's a question that I think eventually somebody should follow up on and ask officers, would you appreciate more support, would you want more support, or maybe they wouldn't want it anyway, but it's a question that should be asked in my mind. But anyway, I'm sorry for that aside. As far as the complaint process, one of my interviewees did say they filed a complaint. They were pretty unsatisfied with the results, and again, it was a whole question of closure. It just didn't feel like it got me there. But I'm going to answer this one from my own personal experience, because as an advocate, and I think a lot of you have heard this story before, the whole reason why I'm sitting in this room is because in the past years that I've been working for BCIL, I've had numerous people come in and tell me about their stories with the police, and as an advocate, my response is, okay, well, let's file a complaint. And except for this one person who I just met this week, not a single of these people were willing to file a complaint. And that's what cued me into there being an issue with this process somehow. That's why I'm here, really, it's because of that experience. So I'm just going to answer that question broadly for the whole disability community and say, no, they're not comfortable making complaints. And there's a few different reasons for that. One is just the sense that it'll be a lot of paperwork and frankly BS, and it won't go anywhere, and why should I waste my time and energy? Then the second reason is, why should I waste my time and energy when it's only going to set me up for potential retaliation or backlash? And then the third reason is, especially for folks with like reading disabilities and cognitive disabilities, the complaint process itself is really difficult and intimidating. And if you don't have a computer or an internet, you're not going to do it online, and if you're not comfortable filling it out on paper, and so that whole piece. So that's kind of, I'm answering for the whole community on the part of the complaint process. And that kind of goes along with safety. I will say that over the years, with one exception, I have never heard any stories of the police using like overuse of force, like physical force or violence, but they're all stories of disrespect and intimidation and things like that, that one of my people actually said, I thought it was a great quote, they said, their number one job is to diffuse the situation. Disrespect and threats only serve to escalate. So, and that's kind of the pattern. That's another overwhelming story that I've heard, which is also why I'm sitting here. And to be honest, I didn't get, because the folks I was talking to was kind of so emotional, we didn't get into a lot of that brainstorming of what else they wanted. I heard versions of they want the police to answer for it when they make mistakes. They want apologies. They want closure. And I've also heard versions of someone should know. Someone should be following up. So that's my little report.
Thanks, Lynn. So I got 5 interviews done, people in the community that identified as having a mental health challenge or has worked in that field before. And I've had, mine were kind of mixed about, everybody's had encounter with the police department or had experience. Some of it negative, some of it positive. Some of the positive was one person who had a mental health crisis, and when I asked them what made it positive, the response was, they listened to me. And I think that really went a long way, that the person felt heard. Because a few other people had negative experiences, and they said that they didn't feel heard. They felt like, you know, they weren't listened to, their concerns were not addressed. So I think that's really seemed to be the differential between the two. Of the 5, 2 have made complaints. They knew how to make the complaints. One said, well, it's right on the website, it's easy to follow. They said that they don't feel like their complaints were followed up with, even though they had called a few times, they never really got any follow-up, and they kind of just dropped it because it wasn't really worth the time to try to get an answer to it. The other thought too was when it came to safety, most people, some people are like, I don't feel safety, you're like, you know, it's not an issue to me kind of thing. One person did have a good quote of, well, they've never made me feel unsafe, but they've never made me feel safe. And I asked them, kind of elaborate a little bit, and I was like, well, you don't ever want the police at your house. But I've never felt unsafe, I don't feel safe, like, I'd rather just avoid it altogether kind of thing. When it comes to being treated fairly, I think that was a mixed response as well too. Some people said, well, yeah, I felt like, they were really responsive, they listened to me. Other people said no, they thought factors such as race, as well as maybe social status, income status, may have made a difference as well too. And also, if you've lived in Bennington your whole life, if the police know you well, that may affect you, how you're treated. And then other people, like I said, felt like they were treated fine and fairly. They did say that they don't think the Bennington Police Department, I think all of them said they don't feel like the Bennington Police Department either doesn't understand all the challenges and needs of all sectors, or they may not have enough resources. So I guess, again, I think that same thing that we're hearing about needing more training or more support per department may help as well too. And that was pretty much what it came down to as well. About what we'd like to see is more diversity in a police department and more community engagement and training for officers. So I think more support from everybody involved, and that just being heard, I think, as civilians.
I had a couple of conversations. One ended up being more representative of a community that's in addiction and in recovery. And then the other was reflections back from the NAACP and some of the various folks that are involved in the BIPOC community here. And feedback leaned pretty heavily in a negative direction because of people's individual experiences and the experiences of clients that they work with. Some of them are quite painful. I heard a lot of sadness. I heard a lot of hurt. And I heard a large amount of distrust in this process right here. And that was a little hard to hear, because I know we all have, we're here and we have such good intentions. There are folks who have been sourced prior to us marching out in the last week and a half in the past as part of the IAP report.
The 2019 report.
There was a time then, and I think so going to communities or people who are in these specific communities, and they're saying, really, you want my feedback? I gave you my feedback. I brought my people in. We told stories that traumatized people and re-traumatized them. I'm not going to go back and ask these people to speak again, because it is upsetting to them to have to walk through that whole thing again. And I have to respect that. And I think there's a valuable comment there, right? Which is, and that bleeds into the distrust of this process, meaning if we were sourced before and we provided feedback, raw, honest feedback, and then nothing happened, and then nothing happened, and then nothing happened, and then there were some independent efforts to pull together a what if, like here's a proposal at least, and that also was not received in a way that felt acknowledgement. There was no acknowledgement felt by the group, let's just say that. So there have been some misses, I think, in terms of people feeling like they've been not only heard, but met at the table as a respected person, part of the process and conversation. I heard a real desire for accountability, meaning we want to hear this didn't happen the way it should have. We're sorry. We understand this ended up being hurtful. It did not, this is what we intend to do moving forward and commit to. That's the kind of stuff people are looking for. Like real, honest, direct, I'm sorry, this happened, you're right. it hurt people and it wasn't meant to, but this is what happened. We pledge moving forward. That's what people want to see, and they do not feel has been done. I think that accountability piece is huge. I think the respect for all people was another comment that I heard, and I heard that echoed from some of the rest of you, which is people get a reputation in this town, and if you make a mistake once, some people feel they are forever defined by that. You know, small town, there are people I bang into all the time. I went to high school with them, right? And so there are opinions that have been formed a long, long time ago about some people that they feel they cannot shake with respect to how they interact with law enforcement here. I also heard a lot of pain around the number of people in this community who are in active addiction, sensitivity for that experience. There are also a huge number of people in recovery. And I heard complaints specific to people who are in recovery being stopped by police, being searched, being asked for information that would help them solve some potential other drug bust. So having people who are in recovery, 3-4 years even into recovery, being identified immediately as a drug addict and then potentially asked for information around a community that ostensibly one is moving away from as part of your recovery, and is a very challenging process. So how can we help police to be supportive of the people who are not only in active addiction, but also those people who are trying really hard to change their circumstances? And do we fairly give people that second chance? So that is, I would say, in summary, what I heard, and I hear some echoes from lots of people around some themes here. In wrapping this up, just because of time, is everyone okay with our outreach committee putting together a compilation of this, bringing it back to the next meeting, maybe holding it up against some of the feedback that jumps out from the IAP? Nerd to say, right? Does that sound okay to everybody?
Sounds very good.
Yeah, I'm also on that committee, and I would just like to mention that everybody has done a great job. These interviews were eye-opening, I think, for all of us in a lot of different ways. And I think we need to focus on how they fit into the charge we have, and fold all of the community trends that are identified when we get a substantial number together, and fit specific recommendations, for example, for policy development to include certain pieces. That it's not our job, as I understand it, maybe this is a question for Brian, or maybe you all agree or no, to write policies, but rather to make recommendations about what policies we think need to be done by the board with the police and the union and everybody else that comes up with it, but acting independently, that they can, when we get to scope, that they have the power to say, we want to see a policy not just on how do you report, but a complaint, but how do we help people who are not comfortable making the complaint reach out and get help to do it.
And we
So
do,
I think
to get into that, we do have some in there for the scope
good. So,
discussion,
good.
yeah.
So I think that that's how we need to think about how we're going to use all this great information we've got and fit it into our charge, so that we don't get off on thinking about what we would write for a policy, but rather what we want, what we would recommend that we see in the policy addressed.
Yeah, and I think, at least my understanding is that our job is not, our task force job is not devising the policy, but to have recommendations about how the board can devise policy. And I think it'd be very appropriate, based on the surveys, to forward recommendations to that board when it's formed about some of the issues we hope that they would explore, which would be different from us trying to write the policies, because we're not authorized to do that. Does that make sense?
It does, but I also think that when we make a recommendation for policy, we could say, we have heard that these policies, and we feel strongly that these policies need to be reviewed, and if they do not include all of these elements, that you, the board, the independent board, consider making more specific recommendations on revision. I think we can do that as
Yes.
part of our
I agree with that.
recommendations.
Wholeheartedly.
I don't think we have the legs or the time to do town policy review and assessments before our recommendation and our report is due. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I can imagine there's a considerable number of town policies out there.
The town is already doing a policy review right now. They're already in the middle of that process.
That's fine, but I'm saying this group here, I don't think it falls within the purview of our time or our charge to review town policy. And that this something.
I agree with that as well. What I was trying to say was that I think that we make a recommendation to the board that when they're looking at policies, they look at what the current policies are. I don't think we have time to research the appropriateness of all of the policies that are currently there. I think that will be the community police, whatever we call them, oversight or advisory board's job to do.
Right.
Yeah, we do, when we get into scope of practice, our subcommittee did get into that, we, started touching on those points.
Okay.
So that would be a good idea, just to kind of, we can have a little bit more discussion then too, but great points, thank you all.
We okay to move on to the complaint report? I didn't run copies off for everyone. If you have a neighbor and you can share with them.
Anybody need one? Because I could share with Gio.
Is everybody over there have one that can share with somebody? If not, I can give you mine and share with Mark. Good?
Lauren, you had your own back.
All right, so I think we were looking, as you said at the beginning of the meeting, for some reactions, if anyone wanted to share. Any thoughts about just the report overall? And then I think we should move into what we can do with this information, like what happens next with this. Lynn?
He's ready to
So
go.
to my mind, this report validated my experience, which is that people just don't report. There were 2 complaints in 2021. The other thing that jumped out at me, and maybe I would need to see further reporting, but that of all these reports, only 3 of them, 4 of them, yeah, 4 of them.
Sorry, I just hopped on, and I don't know if this is gonna work, let's try this one.
Anyway, but it's not conclusion.
Can you hear us, Brian? I think you're muted.
I can, I'm sorry, I just muted myself. I heard that feedback, I thought it might be me.
And
I can't see anyone, but I can hear you.
We can see you.
That's not gonna be good.
Lynn, if I could make just a comment, just something, because I saw that also, but when I put it down to, I'm looking at the 2020, 527 was the last report, and I'm actually just looking at how much. I wondered how much COVID has a part of the people not, less than, I didn't know if there was less interaction, because I didn't know the number of interactions. This just shows us the number of reports.
We do about 10,000 interactions, calls for service here. I'm going to say just average about 10,000. It says 2019, about 10,000.
Okay. Your experience with the onset of COVID, was there less interactions or?
There's a lot more interactions handled by phone, because we're trying to limit contact, there's all this traffic stops there.
Right.
So I actually found that interesting that in 2019, there was only 4, and then
Right.
it jumped in 2020. And then I was very surprised to see that kind of only 2. ICP report came out in 2019, there's a chance that people felt more like, hey, now maybe there's going to be some improvement here for this complaint process that we can now take advantage of it. And there's a chance that once 2020 ended, they realized, okay, well, maybe that didn't go that well.
Okay.
Long way to be looking for that, no.
So there could be a lot of different factors.
Yeah, but for about the past, like I said, since 2019, we've been reaching out on the call. We took a little dip last year. But we still try to respond to those calls even if it's over the phone, depending on the severity of the call. So, Chambers leaves are on guard, that's we have a phone call instead of
Brian, can you hear us?
I'm struggling to understand what's happening. I now I see why it was such a challenge. I see it's very challenging. I don't quite understand, but so I'm doing my best to hear.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about this report. How, in our subcommittee, we were talking about complaints, and I said, Benno, you don't get many complaints. He said, oh, we get complaints. People call in and complain, but they don't, apparently, so I'm trying to so how does something get on this list? Obviously, all the people who are complaining, which I think there's actually a significant community of people calling in, and from talking with officers, I think some people, need attention, and this is a way to get attention, so they have conversations, but obviously there are people who have real concerns. How do we get in this list? Because obviously there were more than 2 people in all of 2021 that were disturbed about something that happened in the police department.
These are the formal complaints.
Okay, so these are the written complaints that
Not
got to the computer.
not the complaints that you just call, I want to speak to the chief because I didn't like the fact that I got a ticket.
So none of those calls to the chief get in here unless the person files a written
They file a
report.
formal complaint.
Okay.
They offer assistance for anybody, like let's say with a disability or maybe whose primary language is not English and they want to file a report?
So I am not allowed to take reports, as you saw from that, the policy that was sent out, that happened at a supervisory level. So if they say I want to make a complaint, so let me go to my supervisor. So
I just wonder if they have resources for people who may not have the, ability to write or.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not the person to ask. Like I cannot take that as a road patrol officer. I have to pass that up to my supervisor. So that's the first thing that I do is say, well, to my supervisor.
Well, if somebody doesn't have access to a computer, or can't enunciate or write, they can sit down with the chief of police or the lieutenant, or in fact, a shift supervisor to formalize that complaint if they wish to do so.
Okay, so there is some type of resources.
Oh, yes.
So the question is, in that sense, on whether it be the town Bennington website, where is it communicated to the populace that if you have concerns or issues to ensure they're properly followed up on, you have to file a formal complaint? To call someone up and yell at the sergeant on the phone about something doesn't address anything other than maybe allow that person to vent. But if there's now kind of a blowback that, well, look, we're not capturing all the complaints, it's very difficult to capture a complaint if said individual doesn't sit down and make that a formal complaint. Maybe it needs to be communicated over there, like you can just vent or have an informal complaint that pretty much won't go past a phone call, where if you want substantive action, you have to sit down and write or somehow communicate with the leadership your displeasure. But also, as Marjay mentioned, and I think I've mentioned before, the most important part of it all is feedback. Said individual presents their concerns, it's looked at, and they sat down and wrote a formal complaint. I think they're entitled to a written formal response. Now, if they're unhappy with that response, I don't know what redress they have past that. And I'm hoping, or I foresee that this committee, whatever it may be, that when these complaints are finalized, that they come across the committee's desk, and the committee actually can look at the substance of the complaint, the substance of the PD's investigation and response to it, and can render a non-concurrence or concurrence with the issues and forward that on up to the select board for their final acceptance. But I mean, it's really unfair of all parties for us to say, well, they weren't willing to make formal complaints, or we have to take that in a negative light. You kind of get what you pay for. If you aren't willing to get involved, you can't be complaining that the system doesn't work.
And I would wonder if people realize that when they call in, it's not considered a complaint. I mean, I had a couple of us from the Interfaith Council had a really good discussion with Paul and Cam about a concern that we had, and I'm sure it isn't there, and I didn't know I wasn't filing a complaint, or that I was. I mean, it was a very good response, and it was a very thorough response, but it seems like we'd want to make clear whatever process of complaints we develop, that people know whether they're making a complaint or not, because I would think if I called in, I was making a complaint, that I was making a complaint. And so it seemed like there'd need to be some process in the police department's practices too, for example, that when somebody complains, they'd be invited to you, would you like to make a complaint? So that we can start the process of dealing with this and giving you a response in the end. And I agree with Clark fully that if somebody makes a complaint, they certainly deserve a response. And I think we've talked about, people talk to me about apologies at times. That's an issue that I know Brian, I asked you in an email about, I haven't had a chance to answer yet, but whether expecting apologies is a part of some community's process when the decision is that, whoops, we screwed up. Is that a normal part of a process? Did you hear me or not?
I did. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure. So I can't see anything, but I got it so I can hear much better. And I guess my first question is, where are we on the agenda? Are we on the purpose of the report?
Correct, yeah. We're still on the purpose subcommittee. Sorry, we're postponed that, but that would be, we did revise the agenda, so in place of the purpose subcommittee is this complaint report. So essentially we're at number 4, but it's been adjusted.
Okay.
So it helps you with the agenda.
No, that's helpful a little bit. And I did see Marcia's email, and I forgot going on about me. I have rarely been on my computer at a conference this time this morning. So I'm not on top of all the details. I apologize.
No problem.
I would like to be. But I would say that, this whole concept of is it a complaint or is someone complaining? I think, every department I've seen, and I'm sure oversight agencies as well, whatever variety there may be about documenting calls and inquiries, a formal complaint is very considered when there's someone, they provide their name, they have a very specific complaint, and they're asking for something to happen with it. I mean, if someone calls in and says, I wanted to tell you about something, it can be challenging to make that a formal complaint. I think it's something you want to think carefully about, how those are documented and what to do with those, because if someone just calls up and says, I'm really mad, it may not be something that's easy to investigate. So in a general sense, it's hard to answer that very specifically, but it is a common issue, and most places come down on the side of someone has to submit a formal complaint, either on a form or by phone, but be very clear that they're filing a formal complaint. A lot of people will say, I don't actually want to file a complaint, I just want someone to listen to me. Yeah. So that's also one of the things to kind of take cognizance of. It's not everybody that reaches out is looking for a formal complaint process. And on the other hand, sometimes people may just say, hey, I just want to let you know about this, I don't need anything to happen. And the department might say, this is actually a problem. We need internal affairs to look into this because this does not conform to how we expect our officers to perform.
So I guess that raises a question for me about, is it a part of anybody's process when someone calls, when John Q. Public or Jane Q. Public calls into the police department and starts complaining, to ask them, do you want to file a formal complaint? Is that invitation offered to people, or is it not offered to people?
But again, my answer, this is not based on absolute knowledge. I know here in Cambridge it is, and most cities where I'm aware of what the police department does, that's true. Now, there's certainly places where people are discouraged from making complaints. So I think it is something that should be in policy somewhere if possible. And again, it has to be written in a way that conforms with law and bargaining agreements and all of that. But I'd say it's a good practice if possible to really have clear guidance for those who might receive a potential complaint about how to handle it and how to properly encourage people to file a complaint if it makes any sense whatsoever to do so.
I just want to caution us on time too. We still have two subcommittees that are about 20 minutes each, and we're running awfully short. So I just think we can get final thoughts on this quickly, and then we can move on. And I'm sure it's something that we can touch back on too another meeting.
I had one little thing about police offering apologies. It's my understanding that it's usually not done, because if they say they're sorry, then they're admitting guilt, which then can open them to legal things. So as a general rule, they don't issue apologies unless the legalities have already gone through and it's part of the settlement.
So Brian, do you have any feedback on that?
Okay, and I did hear the thing about time, so I'll try to be quick. I would say, again, every department is different. I don't know what Ben would say, but in general, I think that's more of a cultural issue. It's been a long-standing cultural issue of, not admitting that you did something wrong, not backing down, and I see that changing. And I think it's one of the things the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing talks about in different ways. But it's more the idea that if you back down, you're showing weakness, and then people can say, oh, well, look what we can do. We can push back against the police, and it's not necessarily a conscious thing. It's more of a cultural idea that you're kind of losing the ability to manage situations. You're losing control. And so my experience has been it is very challenging for officers on an individual basis to think about apologizing. I mean, I've done a couple of mediations where it turned out that the complainant really wanted an apology, and that's not what mediation is for. And the officers were looking for more of a kind of mutual understanding as opposed to, oh, I'm going to come in and you're going to tell me you're sorry. So I think that it's changing, but my sense is it's more of a cultural issue.
I think when we talk about restorative justice as being, we learned a little bit about Vermont embracing that practice. And when we talk about restorative justice, it seems we're oftentimes talking about victim and perpetrator, right, coming together. But I don't see that there isn't the same application for people in the community and the police to have restorative justice justice processes in place around some of these complaints where there's real deep hurt and mistrust in the community. So just a thought.
So are we going to set up eventually a subcommittee to deal with the complaint process? Because I think that's part of our, so, I think this discussion is good, and when we get ready to set up a subcommittee, then we can set that group off to.
I move that we do that so that we can keep moving forward. And i.e. the thought process, we had a little bit of a discussion around what comes out of this piece right here, meaning what would a complaint report in an ideal world look like? What would it tell us? How would it speak to the things that we heard? So I think there's a whole lot to learn from this. Yeah, Ben?
I think just about all of us are in this subcommittee now. What I'm hearing what we're talking about as far as complaints go, and I'm not trying to add more to the scope committee, I hear that as being part of the scope topic though. Is that something that the scope committee willing to take that up versus trying to now have people that are on multiple subcommittees, and we know that doesn't work out too well when you're trying to juggle multiple hats.
Yeah. No, we can add that on.
I have a question just about kind of the open law rules or whatever they are. We're now getting so that there are several subcommittees. If we are already doing subcommittee work, but we have input that we want another subcommittee to hear, can we just do that with an email, or does that change the numbers?
As long as the email exchange is only within the subcommittee, you're sending something to the subcommittee, a thought that you have,
Yes,
that's fine.
okay.
If you send it out
To
to
everybody.
everybody,
Oh,
now you're conducting business.
So even though like their subcommittee says, say has 4 members, and say our subcommittee has 3, that's still okay to email?
Yeah.
Is it okay to discuss,
Subcommittee
or is that
can
a
take
no,
input-
no
They can
discussion
take
still?
input from another committee member without violating the open meeting law.
Okay,
Yes, they,
good question, Gail.
thank you.
We're getting shaking heads from another part of the room. I think we need to know what we can do with campus. She needs shaking head when we see it.
So, I am concerned about this. If it's within that subcommittee, sure, it's fine. But if it's another member or 2 outside that's interacting by sending information to that subcommittee, then I think you do need to worry about open meeting law.
So I
So
think.
you need to bring it back
So
here.
Gail can send me an email directly that I can then bring to my subcommittee in person. But if she were to email my entire subcommittee, which is 4 people, therefore her email makes 5, now we have a problem. That's not accurate.
Okay.
So she can email, you can email individual on that subcommittee?
Any one person.
I need one person.
Got it. Thank you.
And then just looking forward on time, we can probably move on to the next part, the composition of the final oversight committee. And I did see there was a document that had gone out with that.
Last week, we had this document called Draft, the Composition of the Safety and Equity Board.
So it looks, I'll share it, it's like this.
Does anybody, Jim, do you need a copy? I have a copy, it's written all over, but,
Marshall said they got a copy.
they got copies there, good. Yes. Here's one we can share. Here's one I'll read. So there are 4 of us on this composition team, which is also the purpose team. We just took up a second job. We thought we needed more work. We'll let everybody find the paper. How are we doing finding the paper? Anybody need one?
Do you have an extra one?
I have one I can loan out. We can share that, right?
No, you're fine.
You're right on the margin.
No.
I already wrote it. Sorry, I transcribed all that, so you can.
I know your secret. You want to switch with me? You can have this one, and I'll be that, be on the right on there, or that.
So Clark, we're going to each read a part of that.
I couldn't hear you, Marcia, you're talking now.
I'm sorry. We are each reading a part of this like we had thought of doing last week.
Okay, how are we determining?
And it says your name, Clark, about halfway down the page.
The attributes of a board member?
Not yet, yeah, but that's what it's going to be.
Okay.
Okay, so there are 4 of us, you can see, me, Sarah Beth, Clark, and Ben. And the first area was, we thought it was really important to seek diversity in the group members by age, gender or sexual identity, ethnicity and race, socioeconomic status, and education, formal and informal. So we include the School of Hard Knocks as well as Castleton College. So we, at least in our work so far, did not set a requirement of distribution for these things, but we were urging the select board to bear this in mind as they are selecting the people that we're looking for that diversity. Sarah Beth?
Okay, we were also to seek awareness and experience and training. We were hopefully trying to get some people on the board that may have some experience with people that have some behavioral issues, mental health issues, people that maybe were dealing with substance abuse, people that have experience dealing with these people, domestic violence, maybe some elder abuse, child abuse. Also, it would be good to have somebody on the committee that was good with data and statistics, so they can hopefully inspect all the data and reach a goal, which, gather a lot of information so that they can form conclusions. and then make some decisions. Also, somebody that has skills with mediation, conflict resolution, somebody that has experience with restorative justice, so they could, could try to help focus on rehabilitation of the offenders through reconciliation, either with a victim or with the community in general. Also, somebody that might be experiencing some racial justice, somebody that has knowledge of the law. I know that the town of Bennington has a lawyer, and hopefully we would be able to, call on them if we needed anything, but if somebody else had a little bit of training, legal training, that would be really helpful too. And then somebody that has experience with policing, either if it's a positive experience that they've had or a negative experience, we think that that would be very valuable to bring to the board. Somebody that maybe has been in the criminal justice system, that knows, what it's like to be in that situation. And then also somebody that feels like they've been discriminated against, they've had unequal treatment, either, was because of their sex or their gender or the color of their skin. Somebody that just really would like to, try to see have the rest of the people see what maybe they might be going through.
And maybe we should stop right there for a minute and ask for input. Maybe I should have stopped.
I have more of a technical thing. When it says substance abuse disorder, I'm just thinking we could use more progressive language. They refer to it now as a substance use disorder.
What is it, a substance what?
Use
Okay.
disorder.
Okay.
Just so it's a little bit more progressive.
Thank you, yeah.
And respectful to the
Thank you.
population.
I have a question just for clarity. Is this under the assumption that it will be the select board members who will be interviewing and choosing people to be on this board?
It is, and that's later on in the
That's
process.
later, okay.
But these are the criteria that we're kind of looking,
So
inviting them to consider.
Right, so as they try to get volunteers to do this really intense work, they're going to do the best they can to try to take in all of these considerations. That's
Yeah, that was our
Okay.
thinking,
Thank
rather than setting up rigid numbers,
yeah,
because we could, you might
And
have
that
somebody
was
who, you might have somebody who'd fit all these qualifications, and then you might have somebody who'd have one, and you just, as they did with us, try to come up with a balance rather than getting too rigid.
Brian is Andrew.
Oh, Brian.
Hi, I'm sorry to say it twice again, and I'm sorry this is so challenging, but I am able to hear, and I think I'm going to throw this out for you to consider as you do this. I'm listening to these different concepts, and I'm really challenged to think about how the composition that was talked about fits with the scope that will be discussed, and fits with the nature of the complaint. It's interesting, so I feel like I'm kind of weighing in on the process at the 11th hour, but having these subcommittees do the work is, I think, very useful. And I think maybe in the next couple of meetings, there's going to need to be work to kind of take these things and see if they actually fit together. Like, does the composition fit with the types of work that you need to accomplish? And how do those things actually address, both the concerns that people have about what may be happening and not being reported, but also how does it fit with the complaints that have actually been coming into the Bennington Police Department? Because I'm sort of like each of these things is in a bit of a silo, and it's a little bit more based on the ideas of what's wrong with policing in America, and it's not quite clear to me how they're all going to fit together. So now, if I were in the room, it might be a little different, but I just wanted to throw that out there for your consideration as you continue this discussion.
Now, I think it's a great point. I know in our subcommittee, we talked about how we think our area is going to bleed into other areas and trying to differentiate that somehow. So I think that's a great point, too. Now, just a quick thought that came to mind as you're saying that. Can we have one member of all the subcommittees meet, just as long as they don't form a quorum, to take back and kind of see how they all move
You have
together?
up to 4, right?
Yeah. Is that possible? So basically, we form another committee.
Another subcommittee.
Yeah. A subcommittee of subcommittees.
Subcommittee of subcommittees?
Yeah. Like after we get it done, so that way we have a representative from each one, kind of see how everything works together. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts was.
So you're talking about 4 people at a time just getting together collectively and?
Yeah, so like a member from every subcommittee we have now, so wouldn't be more than 4, because we can't because of the quorum. But that way we can kind of bring our ideas together.
Why wouldn't you just do that at the meeting?
Yeah, I guess we could. I was just thinking of some way to kind of streamline everything. Right behind you, so.
Yeah, I think it's the spirit of the open meeting law is that decisions don't get made behind the scenes. So if you have a bunch of subgroups and then an individual from each of those subgroups meets together and then goes back out, then essentially you've had a private meeting.
Okay.
So it's really, so then it's more the spirit of what you're trying to do is to keep, you're trying to be efficient, but also keep all the decision making in
Makes
a
sense.
bigger picture.
Okay, perfect.
So are we ready to move to the next section, or do we have more feedback on Sarah Beth's section? Okay, then Clark, you want to fire?
Sure. The attributes we'd be interested in having members demonstrate. Number one is the high level of objectivity. The person will be able to step back, weigh the facts, and come up with a straight, objective decisions and living in a subjective world. And hand in glove with that is a demonstrated experience in maintaining confidentiality. Might be a hard one to label, but someone who works with people's financial records or medical records, things that are significant that require a high degree of confidentiality. Someone like that would be a reasonable person to consider for the board. And as we're all discovering, they're communicating effectively. Someone who is able to make everyone understand what the process is, but also listen. People are speaking with them. A working understanding of English. I know we spoke about both written and spoken, and I understand maybe a concern to some people who is not. Because English isn't their primary language, that's not an exclusionary criteria. The fact that when they do speak or read English, they're able to fully comprehend and effectively communicate to the community and the board. A strong commitment to strengthening the police-community relationships and readiness to help community members be heard. I think all those other preceding was going to lead up to that, I believe. An exclusionary criteria, I think that the individual currently shouldn't be actively involved in, I guess you probably said, criminal legal charges or prejudice every time if somebody's on parole for a crime until their sentence is completely done. I don't think it'd be appropriate having serving. And finally, no active members of a police force or anyone who has been an active police officer in the last 4 years. Again, I think it slides into the realm of maintaining some degree of objectivity and addressing questions of potential police misconduct or misapplication of their duties. Again, attributes, personal realize that they can have with this.
So do we have comments, input on that section?
I just had concerns when we got to a working understanding of English. I know many people in our community whose primary language is not English and maybe has no desire to learn English. I think that the whole idea of having an equity and safety board is not excluding people, and I feel like that language would make people feel excluded.
Well, you're right, I think it's favored. I think in our discussions, the idea was, even if English is not your primary language, if you're not able to communicate or understand the process of what's being said, I think that really puts your ability to function effectively in the negative column.
I just think like in 2021, we have interpreter services, we have so many other things, and then I think we also get to the point of disabilities, people who may do American Sign Language and people who use Braille, and then we're kind of excluding these groups, unintentionally so, but just in general, I think we, try to be inclusive in our community. It's just my thought, it kind of makes it feel like we're not being inclusive and we're
You
I have to
cite
say, I
Braille.
agree with April
Why don't you
100%.
cite Braille and sign language? Again, the basic language is English. You're communicating effectively in
No,
English language.
ASL is a completely different language than English.
If you are not able, in my opinion, I could be wrong, if you are not able to effectively communicate or understand what's being presented to you, that's an impediment, I think, to the program going forward. And as long as you're able to communicate and understand what is going on, I don't have a problem with what your primary language is. I don't think that your disability should be used against you, but are you able to effectively communicate?
And I think Ben had his hand up for a minute too.
I was saying, I think the thought behind it is not to try to ostracize anybody. The thought is the difficulty in understanding the full scope of everything, not to mention the different cultural norms. Whereas if I were to go to a different country, there's different norms and slang that are used, different types of verbiage and gestures that are used that completely are misinterpreted versus coming into into different cultures. So again, it's not necessarily to be exclusive that they have to have that working English and English. The idea is that you're pushing for that again, so that everyone is on the same page, understanding exactly what's being said. Something I wanted to add to that after hearing that, just in addition to what our discussion was, we should also have an attribute of having encouraging people that also have second languages. They understand, because there are different members of the community that speak different languages, and encouraging those members that can speak both languages and have understanding of those languages come forward as well, so that way they're understood. Because the problem is, if they exclusively understand English, then somebody who's coming forward with a complaint that doesn't speak any English, now they can't communicate with people.
And then, I'm wondering too, we have someone who speaks, primary language is a foreign language, it's not English. Would that make people in non-marginalized communities whose primary language is English and doesn't speak English feel more comfortable coming forward if they have a complaint? And kind of creating that more inclusivity in our community. And I don't know if anyone else had any thoughts, it just kind of struck me, because I know like lots of people in our community whose primary language isn't English, but they're just as committed to our community as, English-speaking people, so.
And how would they communicate with the rest of the board? Somebody speaks.
Well,
Interpreters.
Yeah, we have, we should hopefully as a town offer interpreter services and offer different ways for people to communicate, whether it's a disability or, different language. There's, for email, there's Google Translate for informal things, there's other forms that we can use that.
I understand all that stuff, but the thing is, if you're trying to have a meeting and you're, maybe calling into an agency, with a computer or whatever, that's.
Even Zoom has interpreter services.
Yeah. I mean, I've used them before, I have used them before, but it's very hard, very short, like questions and stuff. If you're gonna have like a whole discussion, I don't know, for like a 2 hour.
So it's okay to exclude people if communicating with them is difficult?
I'm not saying.
We're not going that way.
No.
Your interpretation.
It's inherently discriminatory.
Agreed.
No.
So I'd like to touch, we're bringing this, excuse me, McCarr, we're bringing this out for discussion, and I think this is good that you've raised those questions. Thank you. And we're not deciding this all tonight, so I think we need to take this back, talk it over some more, bear in mind what you thought about, and just finish presenting the rest of this so we can move on to
Yeah,
this.
and we are very tight in time, so we got
Yes,
time.
We literally have 5 minutes left before we need to roll into 7 and 8 of the agenda. So we have enough time for public comments. Jim, sorry.
I do have one slight pushback on the exclusionary for no further active legal charges.
Yeah.
Are you going to include also people who will have financial restitution? That would make it an active charge.
Have they fulfilled their obligation to make that restitution?
There are some people who may never pay off the restitution, but are very committed to seeing criminal justice reform.
And just to add to that,
Yeah.
if I was going to be really nitpicky, I'd say maybe we're not looking for people who are on active parole, but I wouldn't necessarily exclude people who are on probation.
I guess my question is, what is the concern with that?
Yeah.
Right.
Because it seems like we're trying to include the people in the first paragraph,
Yeah.
but then we're turning around and excluding them in the second.
Good point. Good point. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah. And what happens if somebody is already serving on the board and then they get charged with something?
I guess that's why I said parole versus probation. Is parole, you haven't really, your charge not final yet, and so we wouldn't really know what the outcome was. of probation, like it's a known
And
quantity.
quite frankly, in Vermont, I can vote if I'm sitting in prison. So I don't know if it's really a good exclusionary. I hear what you're saying,
Yeah.
but if part of the process, if part of the process of criminal justice is to be rehabilitation and not penalizing, I would hope maybe we're moving more towards a rehabilitation process, and that's one way for a person to become engaged in the community.
And I think they'll also have some expertise from their journey that could be a resource to us too. So, but we'll take this back to keep discussing, and we'll just, Ben.
Thank you, I don't need to nitpick
Yeah,
your
no.
group, I just, concerns that came up, you know, but I do appreciate all the work that your subcommittee does.
And it just happens to be your section to read, so we're looking.
So quickly, we're gonna move on
Can
to,
Ben give the last four things?
oh, I'm sorry, I skipped right over that, sorry, Ben.
No, that's fine. Non-voting liaisons, including some people from the mental health community, UCS, substance recovery, Turning Point. Others would be police department, members of paid DCS, state's attorneys, or MAU. The idea of non-voting liaison being somebody that the committee is appointed by that agency or volunteers from the agency that the committee called upon for, let's say, expert testimony, to put it plainly. They would not necessarily be attending each meeting. It'd be for the committee to call that person into that meeting to say, well, this is what we're dealing with. Can you give us insight into this? And again, they're not voting. They don't have a say in what the final outcome is. That is only up to the board to decide. Number of members, 7 members with a quorum of 4. One of the members will be youth, age 14 to 19, appointed for 1 year.
Okay, now we're just moving beyond what we had the last time, and maybe we need to stop here, Ben, because people have not seen this. People have not seen this. So I think we need to pause right here.
All right, so I'm done. Okay.
Yep, thank you. So we will have next meeting, you all received this hopefully today, the longer version. And if you look through the rest of it, then next week we'll take it up again, our next meeting.
Thank you. So we're gonna move into oversight, scope of oversight board. And do a very brief one. This time when we come back, we will give you a longer one for the next meeting. So one of our questions that we kind of ran into is scope versus purpose. They kind of lead into each other, it seems like to us, and we're hoping that Brian may have some thoughts about how to differentiate those two, scope versus purpose. Sorry, did you hear me, Brian? Oh, you're muted.
So I sort of heard you, but I didn't quite hear I heard the part about scope leading into purpose, but I didn't quite make out that there was a question for me. So
we're just kind of curious what your thoughts are on how to, separate those two. At some place we are starting to get into purpose when we're discussing it, and what your thoughts are of scope versus purpose.
Okay. Well, let me just get it very quick off the top of my head, because I was looking at the scope piece since that went out. Let me do it this way. So when I was looking at the scope, I mean, it's a lot of areas of work. I had some specific comments and questions in certain ways, but I think the purpose is really more about what should this board's role be in the community. What is its role in town government? What is it there to accomplish and do? Whereas the scope is more about the breadth that work will take in the ability or to actually accomplish those things. And so, a lot of things in the scope document are in that realm. They're more about the types of work. But I think it's also, it's not just kind of a list of here's the different things we do and how it's done, but how broad is the scope? I mean, for example, that if you look at the scope document, I think you can infer from that because it's a list of specific items. But for me, the scope would actually, it would say something like around training, the board would have a certain general function or around complaints. I mean, when you get to things like act as an advocate for a person wishing to file a complaint, assist complaint with follow-up, and that's not really the scope. That's a set of specific tasks, and those are some of the things I have questions about, which I won't get into now. So, and so I think that's that's sort of the challenge of what I see here, is I think it's a little too much in the details, and maybe going back to those 5 broader points and thinking about how the scope is written in a way that is maybe a little bit more narrative.
Great.
I hope that's helpful.
No, that's perfect. So that's what we're hoping for. Did anyone else in the subcommittee have any questions for Brian in regards to that?
April, I had one question.
Yep.
And it has to do with, is this committee going to be an advocate for people making complaints? Or is this committee going to be a fair and impartial group that reviews the work of the police department after those investigations are completed when a complaint is filed? I understand that people may need help filing a complaint, but is that the responsibility of this group, or is that the responsibility of other agencies that might be out there?
Is there any agencies that you know of that currently fill that role?
Well, you can't really be both, can you? You can't be an advocate and then a fair and impartial jury or judge.
And that was exactly, I didn't want to get into all the details at the time, but that was exactly what I would agree with as well. So I think it's a very important point.
And I think our thoughts were is we should be a collaborative board, but at the same time, we also want to have all the evidence as well too, at least, you know, when I think about it. So I'd like to have the police report, but at the same time, have access to that evidence as well too, so we can, the board can hopefully make their own decision. And I don't know what anyone else's thoughts were on that.
We're just in discussion, this is not final, right?
No.
So when we speak about advocates, to your question, April, there are advocates. For example, the Council on Aging. They're a great advocate for the elderly, and they would be more than willing to help anybody in that population to complete a complaint, a formal complaint. And I think in each of the organization groups, we could probably have someone step up and volunteer so that they could be referred to that group.
I think it might take some more research just to make sure there is an advocate role.
Sure. But it's just an option as we think about the scope, I think, rather than to have this group do it and be on call to do that. Again, I'm concerned about the workload of this group and how we can help the community share and build community relations that way, actually, I think.
Mark?
You know, just
I think Stuart is 100% on Mark, and that objectivity is, in my mind, diametrically opposed to being an advocate for any one person. I perceive this committee's role is to be made aware of a community concern that resulted in a complaint that was processed and a decision was made where this committee steps in and looks at the information the PD had, i.e. the complaint, their internal function to address that complaint, and the decision in looking at all of that process, using the appropriate community policies to see if they all match up, and then forward a non-compliance or a non-concurrence and a concurrence to the select board. You know, we're not taking sides, we're saying we looked at policy and the policy states this, and this should have happened. From what we're seeing in the paper trail, it did happen. So the decision or the action was appropriate, or we say we see some areas that we have concerns about. And the council, you know, the select board, in my mind, would then take that non-concurrence and go back to those people who they supervise and say, hey, this is a problem, or could you explain this to us? And do a review, but I don't see advocacy as representing an objective approach to an issue.
Sorry, on a slightly separate note, when we have one issue with people with feedback, anyway, about fear of retaliation. So if a complaint is going about the police to the police, there's a great distrust that that will be looked at, reviewed impartially, right? So there's, you know, some cause to ponder the role of this committee in simultaneously receiving complaints. I'm not saying take it away from internal investigation, but that there are parallel, that we're aware that complaints have come in, and then there's the ability to say, oh, what happened to that last month, right? Like there were these three, we see them come in and we're expecting some kind of report out so that there's accountability. If there's always a report on the back end, then there's never any accountability during that process.
I don't think this committee has accountability authority. I think this committee takes the information they have, writes a non-concurrence or a concurrence, and forwards it to people with the authority to enforce or demand accountability. And that would be, in my mind, between Stewart and Select Board.
And should or should not this committee be made aware of things that don't necessarily fall into a complaint category, like I filled out the PDF and I sent it in? That's a complaint. That's the way we're saying that's a complaint.
You said PDF,
Right.
you mean an
What
application?
about
What do you mean by that?
complaints?
Lost
What
me.
about a complaint that never came in on a piece of paper that's an actual lawsuit right now? That's a complaint to me.
Well, I
That
understand.
involves interactions with the PD and there are legal proceedings happening. I think that my personal thought is that this committee wants to be aware.
No, I think if there's litigation going on, the committee would have no business being involved. That's why the town has litigated. We should not be involved.
Oh, I don't
in
want to be
litigation.
involved in it. I think we should be aware.
But it's
Because
happening.
it's part of a complaint issue.
Was it a formal complaint? That's another issue. Are we getting a formal complaint? If somebody calls up and complains to the shift leader and doesn't put anything in writing, doesn't pursue it, but instead goes and sees a litigator, by the very charge of this committee, we're not involved because guess what? There's no complaint.
And Brian has his hand raised, I'm wondering if you may be able to help put some insight into this.
Well, I'll have a little insight on if I can solve anything. I guess just to be more explicit and perhaps build on what Stu was saying, because I had the same thought. I guess I would start by saying, you want this committee to be an advocate for a fair and impartial process, not for an advocate for a complainant, nor an advocate for a police officer or anyone else. I mean, part of the challenge that happens even when that role is clear in my own work is that people come to us, they make a complaint, and they start to think that we're their advocate, and they want our help, and they want to get advice, and they want to know what to do about their legal case, and that's not our role. I mean, our role is much more around looking at what happened and making a determination. And it is also not so much, the complainant's not happy, so we're going to help them, and we'll start reviewing things. I mean, if there should be a process that involves reviews and standards for complaints. So it shouldn't only be if someone's unhappy. I mean, it could be an appeal process, but it shouldn't be something where, we're the advocate for the complainant, we help them file the complaint. If they don't like the outcome, they come back to us and we help them fight it. I mean, I don't know if that was the intention, but that's kind of how this reads. And I think that you want to really find a way for this committee to be fair and impartial all along the way for the benefit of being able to do work clearly, for the benefit of making sure complainants understand the role of the board, and for making sure that the police department and police officers feel that you're also fair and impartial. I mean, would you do a similar thing for a police officer? I don't think so, because the dialogue here has been around power imbalance and all of that, which makes total sense. But if you're going to be the advocate, you will not be able to be the fair and impartial judge in some sense. So I think that piece really needs to be cleared up. And generally, where people go is to be that fair and impartial advocate for a fair process. So that's why it's offered in court.
So what if we change the wording on that first one to assist person wishing to file a complaint to find support and understand complaint process?
Which almost asking would liaison be appropriate?
Or just keep the word liaison and take advocate out of there. So we're getting to the point of the role would be for the oversight people to make sure that the person has support in filling out the form, not necessarily to advocate for them or help them with it, but as Gail was saying, to refer them to other community organizations, make sure they have that support, and make sure they understand the process.
I think that's your agreement with PD, right? You go in, go to speak to a police officer just in general, and you have language or cognitive difficulties, the officer you're speaking to, in my mind, should be the point person to get you the resources to overcome that problem. You know, if a person says, I want to speak to the PD about a complaint, they don't, I see that's the role of the select board or even the town manager. They go to them and say, hey, you know, I have this problem and I really am terrified of discussing it with the police. Can I file my complaint with you? But again, on Stuart's concerns, I don't think the committee should be involved in the initiation and processing of complaints. I think they should be in a review and advisement position for the town board. I don't believe they should be actively involved in the complaint process. If someone has a complaint, they contact someone on the committee. I think it's reasonable for the committee to say, have you discussed this with whoever in the PD serves as a liaison? And if they say, I have problems with that, I'm difficult. The select board, I think, needs to step up and say, okay, well, we can do that, but I don't think a committee that's charged with objective assessment of the process and the actions taken under that process are in a position to be involved in the process.
Thank you. And I don't think that probably went short, or very short time, we really have to do the public comment. So we'll take back all the considerations, and when we meet again, you know, we love about our stuff.
And I apologize, Bill, let April finish out, because I have a hard stop at 6:30, so.
Okay, so I'd like to move for public comment. Anyone here would like to make a public comment? Oh, Brian, you have your hand up?
Your hand is still up, Brian.
Just want to make sure they have anything else.
Sorry about that.
They guess they don't have a call-in number when we're in person, they can come here in person.
Yeah, they come here in person. We're doing this simply so Brian can.
No, I understand that part. I just thought there was like a way for us to call in the name.
One special note, our next meeting is via Zoom.
Correct.
Because Clark will not be here. And Brian and Pam are also engaged on the 16th elsewhere. So that meeting should be by Zoom as well. So we're not trying to do this. This doesn't work really well.
So Brian's going to be able to join us though on Zoom, the next meeting?
Yes. Well, I think we are on Zoom at the next meeting.
We are, correct.
We did that for Clark.
Right, thank you.
But then on the 16th.
On the 16th, we would also be by Zoom, because then we wouldn't have to try to set this up. This really doesn't work for really having Brian participate as we would hope. So I think it's just easier to go to Zoom and have the whole committee via Zoom. And we would, of course, set that up so that we would all participate as we did the first couple of years.
Okay.
And then I apologize, I've asked this in email like 2 or 3 times, and I thought it was on the website, but so the January 6th meeting is in person then?
I don't know what anybody else thinks. I like meeting in person. It's a little bit easier than Zoom. I like it too. I'm pretty flexible though, so if anyone's like hard to post in person, I can work with Zoom, but technical difficulties with Zoom's a little rough some days, so.
And we hadn't really talked, at least my notes don't indicate what we had decided to do with the 2 meetings in January. We'd only gotten through December, so if we want to do those in person, that's the intent. January 6th and 20th in person at this facility.
Yeah, well, I would say I can do, let me just double check. Yeah, I should be able to do both of those in person. Hopefully we won't have a nice New England snowstorm either of those days, but, and again, I apologize about 12 times tonight, but I have just been challenged to juggle a lot of different things with in-person and Zoom, and so I just wanted to make sure I'm on top of that. So I will put those both in my calendar for a trip to Bennington in January.
Great, thank you.
Bring your skis.
As long as it's not mud season.
Yeah, just a quick reminder, that means like December 2nd, so before our next meeting, all final interviews have to be into Margay. So that way that subcommittee can make a composition of it. And then we'll have a report out, it sounds like, by the composition and purpose subcommittee, as well as the scope and practice subcommittee. Okay, and then anything else? No.
Yeah, how do we get these to Margate? I've got my file.
Hold on to them for now, pass them to her next time.
I just gave her mine.
Just give them mine.
Yeah.
Let Janice see her.
Or maybe you can scan and email them to her if you have those
Oh, no, I've got all
capabilities.
these pages.
Just as long as there's no, you know,
Yeah, that's, if we're not going to be able to meet our dates then to get them all in by the 29th and have time to collate the
Okay.
information for the next meeting, if they don't, if we don't have the reports.
yeah.
So can we give them to Stu? Is that, if we
If you
give
want to
them-
send your stuff to me, we can put it together and get it out to Margate.
Great.
So we could drop by the town office, or we could mail it to you, or email it to you.
Yes.
Either way.
Okay, now you can make your motion, sorry.
Motion and seconded by Ben.
Okay, great. So we're all adjourned. Thank you.